Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, an answer to what, why, and how of newspaper reading from your UPSC perspective. Today, let us discuss the important news which has appeared in the New Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper dated 21st April 2020. The news to be discussed has been displayed on your screen, and timestamping for the same has been provided in your description box below. So, let's start our today's discussion. The first news for discussion appears as a lead article on page number 6. It says, "The occasion to revisit the sovereign's role." There has to be a discourse on redefining the state's involvement in India's political, economic, as well as social life. So, this article highlights that COVID-19 pandemic has brought about a paradigm shift in every aspect of life, and sooner or later, governments as well as civilizations across the world, most of whom who are riding the wave of capitalism, including India, needs to readjust not only their responsibilities but also their priorities, especially those areas which have been neglected by state. And with respect to India, the article specifically mentions about health as well as education. So in this regard, this article rests on the idea that Indian state should be strong enough so that the weak in our society can lean on it. So, with respect to paradigm shift, in order to reorganize our priorities and responsibilities, and also for the Indian state, let us go through the highlights of this article. Now, this article should be read primarily from your mains perspective, from your GS paper 1 as well as GS paper 2. In GS paper 1, it gets covered with respect to salient features of Indian society and effects of globalization on Indian society, especially post COVID 19. And under GS paper 2, it primarily gets covered under the aspect of governance with respect to issues relating to development and management of social sector or services relating to health, education, etc., and also government policies and interventions for development in various sectors. Now, this article highlights that the COVID 19 virus is not going to be destroyed anytime soon unless an immediate cure is available, which is very unlikely. So, in this regard, we have to adjust living ourselves amid this virus, and this will require a lot of changes from our side. So, in such a scenario where COVID 19 virus has become a reality, we need to adjust to its presence. And also because of the fact that COVID 19 as of now has halted most of the economic activities of the world, including India. And this has resulted in the contraction in the economy, both from the demand side as well as from the supply side. Now, with respect to supply side contraction, we can say that there is a lack of supply of non-essential items, especially due to restrictions, and this is not only in India but also in most part of the world. And with respect to demand side, we can say that there is a lack of demand of non-essential items as of now. So both these aspects, that is lack of demand as well as lack of supply due to restrictions amid COVID-19 lockdown, has resulted in a contraction in demand as well as supply side. And this has impacted the economies of the world, including India. Further, another important impact of this contraction in the economy is that it has resulted in loss of jobs, especially for the marginalized section of the society and also for those who are daily wage earners. So the lockdown of COVID-19 virus has impacted this section of the society the most. So here it becomes the foremost responsibility of the government to take care of the marginalized section of the society, especially of the daily wage earners. And with respect to India, the government must look after such people who have lost their jobs in such distressing times. So, this article mentions that post COVID 19 virus has not only halted most of the economic activities but has also resulted in loss of jobs, especially for the marginalized sections of the society. And this phenomena is being observed world over. So, amid this crisis, this article highlights that we must learn to take new measures in order to build a new paradigm of life, work, as well as governance. And it is here where the role of state or a government becomes most important as well as critical. And with respect to India, this article highlights that amid this COVID 19 virus, the Indian state or the Indian government should realign its priorities, keeping in mind of the fact that Indian state should be strong so that the weak in our society can lean on the state. So, with this aspect, this article mentions that accordingly, the government of India must revisit its state of affairs, specifically with respect to our polity, our economy, as well as our social sector responsibility. Further, with respect to economy, this article mentions that the government should rather focus more on the public sector enterprises rather than the private sector. And with respect to the public enterprises, the government must take important steps to strengthen the health as well as the education sector. Because it is with respect to the public enterprises where the retreat of Indian state has been witnessed in India. So this article highlights that it is especially with respect to the healthcare system in India, education system, as well as creation and maintenance of infrastructure where the role and responsibility of Indian state has shrunk or declined, or rather it has become nominal, half-hearted or inefficient. And because of this inefficient or half-hearted approach of the Indian government with respect to healthcare, education and creation and maintenance of infrastructure, this has resulted in emergence of the private sector in these fields, and these private sectors work for private gains. So this article highlights that with respect to shrinking of Indian state's responsibility, especially in the social sector, has resulted in a state void in areas which are important or critical for human development. So this article highlights that those who have faced the maximum brunt of the national lockdown in India are the farmers, farm laborers, migrant workers, those people who have become unemployed because of this lockdown, people working in the unorganized sector, rural poor, as well as small entrepreneurs. So all these people are the most impacted people with respect to the national lockdown amid the COVID-19 virus. So this article says that these are the people who are not directly supported by the state government either through a direct cash transfer or through some other way, as most of the daily wage earners are stranded away from home because of the lockdown and have no source of income. Further, our underfunded public health systems are also unable to serve these people in case they catch the COVID-19 virus. So it is in this regard the article highlights that the government must find ways to help the marginal sections of the society who do not have any source of income and who have lost their job because of the COVID-19 lockdown. So in this regard, the article also says that the state should not only roll out economic packages for the corporates but should also cater to the needs of the marginalized sections. Now, another aspect discussed by the author is that this pandemic has created the right environment for the government as well as civil society to revisit, discuss, as well as deliberate upon various aspects of our society, including redefining certain priorities and also the way things work as of now. So, in this regard, let us go through those aspects which have been highlighted by the author, which requires redefining or which requires a proper revisit or rediscussion on those topics. So there is a need to relook or revisit the following aspects, namely every aspect of state's involvement in our collective political, economic as well as social life, relation between state and economy, its role in allocating resources and also addressing questions of inequality, state's duty to provide basic human needs, the extent of market's role in providing services such as health, education, civic amenities, etc., as most of the private sector enterprises are profit oriented. Further, there is also a need to relook or revisit the responsibility of the state as well as private enterprises towards deprived sections of the society. Further, there is also a need to relook into the efficacy of our political structure, including equations between citizens and government, and also the implications with respect to individual freedom, privacy, as well as national security. And in this regard, the relation between the state as well as the citizen. Further, there is also a need for a relook of equation between legislature and the executive and also the way they function with each other. Further, there is also a need to look into the balance of administrative and financial power between states and union on one hand and between states and the local bodies on the other hand. Further, with respect to election of the representatives and also making and unmaking of our governments, as in the way governments are formed and also the way governments are dismissed at times by the governor, and also with respect to empowering the local authorities and the relation between local authorities as well as the state governments. Further, use of money in our electoral system, and lastly, to relook the role of serving and retired members of higher judiciary, especially in any government discipline or in any government office. So these are some of the areas according to the author which needs a relook post COVID-19 situation. So this article becomes an important article primarily from the perspective of your mains examination and also with respect to shrinking role of state in public sector enterprises on one hand and also the need to revisit and redefine the interaction of the state with its citizens. The next news to be discussed appears in the article section on page number 7. It says implement Aarogya Setu but only through a law. Doing so will avoid the dangers of unrestricted use, leading to disproportionate violation of fundamental rights. So basically this article highlights about certain concerns with respect to Aarogya Setu app. These concerns are with respect to citizens' rights of privacy, autonomy, as well as movement. Further, the concerns highlighted are also with respect to the ability of surveillance by the government through this particular app. So, in this regard, this article has also made a comparison with Aarogya Setu app and that of Aadhaar, in a sense that initially Aadhaar was made voluntary, but later on the government made it compulsory for various other users. So, in this regard, the author says that there is a high probability that after some time, when the restrictions on lockdown are eased out, then downloading of Aarogya Setu app will be made compulsory for all citizens, and this might impact citizens' rights to privacy, autonomy, as well as movement. Now, various other concerns were also highlighted with respect to the data security issues with respect to the Aarogya Setu app. So, now the government has come up with certain new privacy designs with respect to this app. So, let us start our discussion by first of all understanding about the K.S. Puttaswamy judgment with respect to right to privacy. So, the Supreme Court of India, in this very famous judgment, had ruled that right to privacy is an integral part of right to life and personal liberty as guaranteed under Article 21 of the Indian Constitution. Further, the court held that these rights are recognized by the Constitution as inhering in each individual as intrinsic as well as inseparable part of the human element which dwells within. However, the Supreme Court highlighted that right to privacy is not an absolute right, and state or the government can make a law to restrict right to privacy. However, any law on invasion of right to life or personal liberty, including right to privacy, must meet threefold requirements. These threefold requirements are as follows. First is about legality. It states that there must be an existence of a law, that is, state action must have a legislative mandate. So it is hereby where the article highlights that the government should enact a legislation with respect to Aarogya Setu app. The next aspect is with respect to need, and this need is defined in terms of a legitimate state aim or state action. So there must be a legitimate state purpose in order to make a law whereby it infringes right to privacy. And the last point is proportionality, where it ensures a rational nexus between the objects and the means. That is, what is the object which needs to be achieved by that particular law, and what are the means to achieve that particular object. So, in this regard, the proportionality law ensures that there must be a rational nexus between the objectives of the law and also the means to achieve or adopt such objectives of the law. Now, it's important to note that earlier the use of Aadhaar was also allowed by private entities, such as private telecommunication companies, for Aadhaar verification. So, there was another Supreme Court judgment with respect to Aadhaar whereby it prohibited authentication of Aadhaar details by private organizations including corporates, citing infringement of right to privacy. So in this regard, let us go through the concerns highlighted by this article with respect to Aarogya Setu app, keeping in mind the important aspects of Justice K.S. Puttaswamy judgment on right to privacy. Now earlier, when the Aarogya Setu app was launched, data sharing through Bluetooth did not define the precise limit on sharing of information. So in this regard, the government of India has come up with a new data policy with respect to Aarogya Setu app. So the data from the app will be saved or stored on a secured server of the government of India. And these data includes name, phone number, age, sex, profession, as well as countries visited by the person in the last 30 days. Now this data will be stored in the server of the government of India as unique digital ID or named as DID, and such data will be hashed. That is, these data will be saved as a hashtag. So what will happen is that when two persons come in close contact to each other, then their DIDs will be exchanged. That is, their unique digital ID which stores these particular information will be exchanged. However, the other user will have no access to stored information. So this is what has been provided as a security measure by the government of India with respect to privacy policy for Aarogya Setu app. Further, the security measure also highlights that the app also collects location data of the user every 15 minutes. and this location data is said to be stored on their phone. So in this aspect, if the user tests positive for COVID-19 or his self-assessed systems indicate any symptoms of COVID-19, then such information will be uploaded on the server. Thus, the government ensures that hashtagging of data as unique digital ID will ensure the protection of these data. However, the article has expressed certain privacy concerns with respect to this particular app. According to the article, the Aarogya Setu app collects personal data of individuals and shares such personal data with the government. Now, this itself amounts to infringement of right to privacy, as sharing of such data with the government can be used by the government for administrative or certain medical interventions if cases required or if it is necessary for the government. Further, by having such data, the government is at liberty to revise policy terms at its own will without even notifying the end users. That is, without even notifying such people who have installed the app. Further, the article highlights that the design of the app will help the government to use such large pool of data for the purpose of surveillance. And all these aspects may violate rights of citizens, specifically the privacy rights under Article 21 as highlighted in K.S. Puttaswamy judgment. So effectively this article mentions that there are certain rights of citizens which might get impacted if the government makes downloading of this app compulsory. So in this regard, the article says that color coding of the app may restrict people's entry to important places for essential services such as ration shops, banks, government offices, etc., or any other important places for their work. And this restriction will have a major impact on the most vulnerable section of the society, as such extreme steps might prove to be disproportionately higher for the vulnerable sections. Further, the article says that in future, individuals or citizens may be forced to download the app to able to access certain basic amenities and services provided by the government. So, compulsorily downloading of this app may not only lead to increased surveillance by the government but also put a restriction on fundamental rights of citizens. So, there are two important aspects highlighted here. First is increased surveillance by the government, and second is restriction on fundamental rights of citizens, including profiling of citizens and their movement design. So these are the important concerns which have been highlighted in this article with respect to citizens' rights. Further, citizens may be forced to give up their rights of autonomy as well as privacy in order to get certain government benefits. For example, having a passport. So the government may make it compulsory to download the Aarogya Setu app to apply for passport. Further, the article says that existing users of the app could be subjected to certain arbitrary restrictions in their fundamental rights. Now, this becomes important because when they had downloaded this particular app, they were not aware about these future restrictions which the government might impose on those people who have downloaded the app. So, in this regard, the fundamental rights of such people might be impacted, as arbitrary decisions on behalf of the government might be taken without informed consent of the end user. And lastly, the article highlights that the present situation seems similar to use of Aadhaar, where initially the use of Aadhaar was made voluntary, but later it was made compulsory for every citizen. So according to the article, these are the various ways in which the fundamental rights of a person may be impacted through this particular app. So, as a way forward, this article says that to avoid unforeseeable dangers of mass surveillance as well as disproportionate restrictions of fundamental rights, it is therefore necessary or imperative that the Aarogya Setu app is implemented through a law. And this is also important because as of now, India does not have any data protection law, and the Personal Data Protection Bill has yet not been passed by the Parliament. Further, the article says that making a law to regulate Aarogya Setu app will not only ensure proper deliberation or discussion in the Parliament, but making such a law will also restrict government's action on surveillance through this particular app. And lastly, if the app is challenged in the Supreme Court of India with respect to infringement of right to privacy or any other fundamental right, then the app must pass the threefold test as laid down by the Supreme Court of India in Justice K.S. Puttaswamy judgment. And these threefold tests are with respect to legality of the act, need for such a law, and proportionality of the law with respect to the objectives which seeks to be achieved and the means through which such objectives are achieved. Thus, this article becomes important primarily from your mains perspective with respect to GS paper 2. The next article to be discussed appears on page number 6 in the article section. It says, Invisible Face of the Fallout. The traditional gender role that women play distinctly affects them in global crises as seen in numerous examples. Now, this article highlights that during any global crisis, including the present COVID 19 virus, it is the woman which gets impacted the most. And in this regard, because of the COVID 19 virus, the women in India are also being impacted by the COVID 19 virus. So, in this regard, this article has flagged various issues faced by women during the COVID 19 crisis and also highlights the importance of taking various measures to address these issues. So, in this regard, let us go through these different issues which have been faced by women during the COVID 19 crisis and important measures to address issues faced by women in India. So, the first issue faced by women in COVID 19 crisis is with respect to professional safety of health workers. Now, most of the frontline health workers, including nurses, ASHA workers, etc., are women. And according to the World Health Organization, 70% of world's health workers and 79% of nurses are women. So, given the stigma against health workers, as they are more vulnerable to the infection, they are posed with a serious challenge of professional safety. As recently, there were a number of incidents of violence against health workers reported in India. So, in this regard, professional safety of health workers, as maximum of these health workers on the front line are women, needs to be taken care of. Now, the next issue is with respect to double burden on women because of work from home. And this double burden is basically with respect to their own respective professional work and also handling domestic work of the houses. And this double burden on women because of their professional work and also handling domestic work of houses is across class barriers. Now, another issue faced by women is with respect to increase in cases of domestic violence, as has been recently reported by the National Commission of Women. Now, the fear of job loss, especially among the lower or the weaker class of the society, has increased domestic tension, and this increase in domestic tension is also leading to increase in cases of domestic violence. Now, the next is with respect to increase in domestic violence because of increase in alcoholism, as alcoholism and abuse are directly related. Further, there is another aspect as well. Because of the national lockdown and lockdown in different states, there is a lack of alcohol availability, and this lack of alcohol availability has also resulted in frustration, thereby resulting in increased violence against women. So basically, alcoholism as well as lack of alcohol availability has both resulted in increase in domestic violence against women. The next issue with respect to women is about depression and anxiety related disorders. And this anxiety related disorder is because of economic, social, as well as psychological pressure amid this distressing time of COVID 19 virus. So, in this regard, this article has highlighted certain steps which needs to be taken in order to address these issues which are being currently faced by women during the current COVID 19 lockdown. So, the steps which needs to be taken is with respect to ensuring safety of our health workers. Second is with respect to ASHA women, as more ASHA women should be allocated for women's welfare. The third is with respect to having an exclusive helpline to address domestic violence. And in this regard, the government should also extend online counseling in order to reduce alcoholism in men, as we have seen that alcoholism in men also leads to frustration, and this has also resulted in increased domestic violence among women in India. So, in this regard, the government has taken certain steps. Ministry of Women and Child Development will set up one-stop centers to provide legal and psychosocial help to survivors of gender-based violence. These one-stop centers shall be linked with the local medical teams as well as the National Legal Services Authority. Further, the staff of one-stop center teams will be linked to National Institute of Mental Health, that is NIMHANS, to equip these counselors. Further, digital governance will be used to ensure safety of women at state level, and NGOs are also directed to ensure that every individual calls at least 10 women every day. So these can be said to be some of the steps taken by Ministry of Women and Child Development. So in this regard, the article further highlights that what else can be done in order to ensure safety of women. It says that the National Commission for Women has appealed to women to reach out to their nearest police stations or call the State Women's Commission for support. Further, it highlights that cash transfer as well as ration support should be increased for women in order to reduce stress in the household, as stress in the household leads to increased case of domestic violence. Further, the article says that amid the COVID 19 lockdown, watching of television has increased. So this opportunity must be utilized by the National Commission for Women so that they can advertise and warn against cases of domestic abuse as well as provide instances of redressal mechanism. Further, the National Commission for Women can also advertise or popularize the existing helpline in the case of domestic violence, that is 181. Further, the mass SMS campaign can be utilized as an awareness tool for women against instances of domestic violence. And the women should also be informed about the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act of 2005, which protects them against cases of domestic violence. Now, since we have mentioned about domestic violence, it's important to know that domestic violence has been defined under the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act of 2005. Further, Section 3 of the Act has defined domestic violence as any of the following: if someone harms or injures or endangers the health, safety, life, limb, or well being, whether mental or physical, of the aggrieved person, and if the person causes physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, as well as economic abuse, then all these abuses will also get categorized as part of domestic violence. Further, it says that if a person harasses, harms, injures, or endangers the aggrieved person with a view to coerce her or any other person relating to her to meet any unlawful demand for any dowry or other property or valuable security, or has the effect of threatening the aggrieved person or any person relating to her by any conduct as mentioned above, or if a person otherwise injures or causes harm, whether physical or mental, to the aggrieved person, then all such cases shall be categorized as domestic violence. So, this article with respect to addressing the needs of women, especially with respect to increasing case of domestic violence, becomes important primarily from our mains perspective. And lastly, in this perspective, we should also know about the National Commission for Women in India. Now, the National Commission for Women in India is a statutory body as it has been constituted under the National Commission for Women Act of 1990. The Act itself says that an act to constitute a National Commission for Women and to provide for matters connected therewith. So, Section 3 of the National Commission for Women Act highlights that the central government shall constitute a body to be known as the National Commission for Women in order to exercise powers conferred to it and perform certain functions which has been assigned to the body. The commission shall comprise of a chairperson who is committed to the cause of women to be nominated by the central government. So it's important to know that the chairperson of the National Commission for Women is a nominated person by the central government. Further, it also includes 5 members to be nominated by the central government from amongst persons of ability, integrity, and standing who have experience in law or legislation, trade unionism, management of an industry or organization committed to increasing the employment potential of women, women's voluntary organization including women activists, administration, economic development, health, education, or social welfare. It further stipulates the fact that at least one member each shall be from and amongst persons belonging to scheduled caste and scheduled tribes respectively. Further, the commission shall also comprise of a member secretary to be nominated by the central government, and the member secretary shall be an expert in the field of management, organizational structure, or sociological movement, or an officer who is a member of a civil service of the union or of all India service or holds a civil post under the union with appropriate experiences. So these are some of the important highlights with respect to constitution of the National Commission for Women, and the National Commission for Women is a statutory body. So this article becomes important from the perspective of GS paper 2, specifically with respect to welfare schemes for the vulnerable sections of the population by the center as well as states. The next news for discussion appears on page number 1. It says speed of virus infection slows, doubling time rises in 18 states. So this news highlights that 18 states and union territories in India have shown improvement in containing the spread of COVID-19 virus. And this is with respect to the doubling rate of this virus. Now, doubling rate refers to number of days required for a virus to double itself. That is, if initially there are 10 cases of COVID-19 virus, then how many days it required to convert these cases of 10 to 20. So for example, if it took 4 days from the case of 10 to get increased to 20, then we can say that the doubling rate of this particular instance is 4 days. So these 18 states and union territories having a doubling time of more than 8.5 days is greater or higher than the national average of doubling rate of 7.5 days. So in this regard, we can say that these states have done a very commendable job in order to contain the spread of COVID-19 virus. Now let us also understand this concept through this particular graph. Now on the x-axis, this graph highlights the dates. As you can see, March 25th, 29th, 2nd April, 6th April, 10th April, 14th April and 18th April. So there is a gap of 4 days on the x-axis. Now on the y-axis, the number of cases has been plotted as 300 to 500 to 1000 to 2000, 4000, 8000, 16,000. Now follow this particular graph, and on 18th of April, if this particular graph had followed, then we would be having an expected case of more than 2 lakh. However, we have contained these cases only up to 15,722 as per this particular report of Johns Hopkins University. Now this graph in yellow represents the case of India. Now as you can see that initially the graph in yellow was similar to this particular graph. However, we have tried to slow down the peak, and now the peak seems to be flattening. And this is a good news with respect to containment of COVID-19 virus, especially in India. So the question is that how has India fared in terms of doubling time with respect to COVID-19 virus? It says that for the first phase of doubling, that is from 750 to 1500 cases, the case count in India took 5 days, according to this particular database of Johns Hopkins University. And this doubling rate of 5 days was longer than any other country. Now in the second phases, when the cases grew from 1500 to 3000, India jumped to the middle of the pack. Whereas with respect to third phase, India appeared to have contained the outbreak quite well, as cases only took 5 days to jump from 3000 to 6000. So the doubling rate in the third phase was 5 days. And apart from Ireland, in all other countries, the doubling rate was quite less, and in Spain it was only 1 day. Further, in the final phase of growth, cases in India took 6 days to double from 6,000 to 12,000, and only in 4 countries was this growth slower than India. So overall, India has fared well in order to contain the COVID-19 virus so far. However, lots needs to be achieved in order to suppress the COVID-19 cases from the country. Thus, this particular news becomes important primarily from the perspective of general science and also from the perspective of Indian society. Now, after our discussion, this forms your question for the day. The question is, consider the following statements about National Commission for Women. First, it is a statutory body. Second, the chairperson is nominated by the Chief Justice of India. So the question is, which of the statements given above are correct? Options are A, 1 only, B, 2 only, C, both 1 and 2, and D, neither 1 nor 2. Now coming to the answer of yesterday, the question was, with reference to art and archaeological history of India, which one among the following was made earliest? In this, the correct answer is B, that is rock cut elephant at Dhauli.